how can I make a difference? You know, you just make a difference in one child's life, and that makes a difference. It starts the ball rolling. So I'm going to ask you to prayerfully consider that. And you say, you know what? God's blessed me. I can afford to do $28 a month. I'll do that. Some of you say, well, you know what? I can't afford that. You know, maybe consider $7 a month. That'll feed a kid for a week, you know, during the month. Or some of you may say, well, you know what, Kurt? God's blessed me more than that. I can afford to give a lot more than that. You know, whatever God leads you to do, I'm going to ask you to do today. I'm going to ask you to make a commitment. And these cards that we have, there's a place on there that you could receive information, a newsletter that tells about what MANNA is doing around the world. And that'll give you a good information. It'll be a good reminder, and it'll let you know what God's doing through you and through MANNA and through many others around the world, just through giving just a few pennies a day. So just consider that. Now, let me tell you this. We don't want you to give your tithe. Okay, I'm not talking about giving your tithe, because everybody, your tithe belongs to this church right here. Actually, it belongs to God, but you give it to this church for the ministry here. Okay, so we don't want your tithe. If that's what you're going to do is take, you know, I'll take, you know, $28 of my tithe and I'll put it towards that. No, we don't want that. Your tithe belongs here. Okay? The mission program of your church, whatever that might be, we don't want that. If you say, God's blessed me and I want to do something over beyond that, then we would give you that opportunity, and we would encourage you to consider doing that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let me just share a few things that God's really touched my heart about, and how He's used it in my heart. You know, we find in the Bible that Jesus loved children. He cared for children. Children were important to Him. You know, there's another thing that's different about this church that is very, very different. Most churches, you don't see children in the sanctuary, in the service. And thank you for that. I love that fact that the kids are here. What did, in Mark chapter 10, I think it is, remember when there were some parents wanting to bring their kids to Jesus? And what did the disciples do? The disciples said, hey, no, take him away. He's busy. Take him away. And what did Jesus say? Jesus said those words that we probably all have heard, and that's, suffer the little children to come to me. That's what Jesus said. Children are important to Jesus. You know, we don't see in Scripture too many times that Jesus got upset. Jesus didn't get angry very often that we read in Scripture. Now, one of those was in Sunday school we heard about, when Jesus came in and cleansed the temple. You know, I wouldn't want to be one of those guys where Jesus came in and started throwing my money tables over, and, you know, He just cleared it. He was upset. He was mad. And sometimes it's a good thing to be mad. Jesus was mad then. You know what? Jesus, when Judas came up in the garden and kissed him on the cheek, Jesus didn't get mad. You know, when one by one those disciples that He had poured His life in, one by one they walked away and left Him there alone, did He get angry? No, He didn't. Did He get angry when they were pounding those nails in His hands and feet? He didn't. He got angry when His disciples tried to prevent some parents from bringing their kids to Jesus. Children are important to Jesus. Our children are important. They need to be a priority. And thank you for doing that, for having kids in here. I think that's awesome. And then there's another story that God really used in my life, and just it's got some great, there's so much that you can get out of the story, and that's when Jesus fed the 5,000. Now, He's fed 5,000 men, so, you know, we know there was one little boy there with a sack lunch. And so there were women, there were children, so, you know, I'm figuring maybe 20,000 people, 15, 20,000, maybe more. I don't know. They're all sitting there listening to Jesus, and they get hungry. And, you know, this is the only miracle that's mentioned in all 4 Gospels. And I like John's recording of it, because John uses names. The other Gospels say the disciples did this, and there was a little boy and this, that, and the other. Well, in John, he tells names. He says Philip and Andrew, and then there's a little boy. Now, I won't go through the whole thing, but Philip, Jesus said, "Hey, find something for these. Give these people something to eat." Philip turns around and looks at all the multitude and says, "What do you really want me to do? I mean, is that really possible to give these people something to eat?" And what did Philip say? 200 penny worth of bread is not enough. So I mean, Philip started to figure out, okay, now if we do this, we do, now a lot of times, how many of us, when we are presented with a problem in our lives, how many of us like to take it into our own hands? How many of us, when we see a problem come up, or when we have something in our life, how many of us start counting our money and say, okay, well, if I pay this guy late, if I do this, I can take care of it. How many of us look at our own resources and say, hey, I got this, God. You know what? You go help somebody else that needs it. I got this. I got my life. That's what Philip did. Then you got Andrew. Andrew, 20,000 people there. Remember that. And Andrew brings this little boy to Jesus. He says, "Hey, Jesus, this little boy, he's got a sack lunch he brought with him." But then what did Andrew say? He said, "But what's that among so many?" He kind of, can you imagine the other disciples? Andrew doesn't say a whole lot. So when Andrew says something, in Scripture, when Andrew says something, the disciples say, "Oh, what?" They listen, And Andrew said, "Hey, here's a little boy with a sack lunch." Can you imagine the reaction of the other disciples? "Andrew, buddy, would you look around? What is this going to do with so many people?" And Andrew's like, "Well, hey, yeah, you're right. What is this going to do with so many people? How can this possibly fill the need?" And then you got this little boy. This little boy hears them talking. We need some food. And what does he do? He offers what he had. And even though he knew he could look around, he could see all those people, there's no way that this little boy thought that lunch could feed all those people. There's no way. How is that possible? But he offered what he had. What he had was insignificant compared to the need. But he gave what he had. When I look at my life is insignificant when I look at the need. And, when I think, God, there's so much to be done. What can you do with me? What can you do with my life? With just me. I don't have any resources. I don't have any talents. I don't have any abilities. What can you do with me? What can God do with you? 1996, my wife and I surrendered to do mission work for the rest of our lives. And since that time, it's been incredible. And I struggled for that for several years. I said, and I thought the same as maybe this little boy. God, what can you use me to do? I saw missionaries come to our church, and I would look at those missionaries and say, wow, that's somebody special right there. And I would give, and I would help support them. But you know what, God's not impressed with your abilities. He's not impressed with your resources. What God's impressed with is your availability. You being willing to say, okay, God, look, I'm not much. I don't have much to offer. But if you can use me, here I am. And that's what God's looking for. Today, maybe you can only give $1 a month. What could $1 a month do? It could feed a kid for one day. Now how many of you, if you were there in those places around the world and a kid came up to you and said, hey, can you at least feed me today?